Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us today for a fantastic webinar on nutrition for ultra running. For those of you that have tuned into UCAN webinars in the past, I know this is a topic that has been requested of us for a long time, and really excited to be able to bring this to you today. I'm Varun Sriram, your host as always, and really excited to have a wonderful guest on with us to share some of her insight on the topic. We welcome Sunny Blende, sports nutritionist, also a columnist for Ultra Running Magazine and Swimmer Magazine. Many of you guys may know her work from those areas. Sunny, thank you so much for taking some time to chat about a topic you know a lot about.
Oh, you're welcome and glad to be here.
So, Sunny, before we really get into the meat of our discussion, I think folks are always fascinated when we have different guests on to hear how they got into the sport or got into doing what they're doing related to the sport. Give us a little bit of your background in terms of the ultra world. How did you get involved? You're both an athlete and a nutritionist yourself. How did you get involved in this whole world?
Well, one way I got involved was having absolutely no fast twitch muscles, so endurance was my area of expertise. And I've always been interested in science. I started out as a dental hygienist for a number of decades, and when my hands gave out, I went back to college, got my master's in human nutrition, and really have exercised in many sports over the years, so sports nutrition was a natural. And I thought that the whole sports nutrition industry and topics really needed looking at in a different way. We've had a lot of old science, and the science is changing all the time, and we have to change with it. So it was very challenging for me. And I don't know if you've heard my definition of endurance events, but it's an eating and drinking contest with some exercise and scenery thrown in. So I realized that if you can be totally trained for a 100-mile run or swim across the Sea of Cortez or whatever you're training for, and if your nutrition goes off, so did your event. So that's where I got into it, got interested, and started trying to help people out.
And it's a great segue, Sunny, really to the first topic area that we're going to be discussing, which is really the challenges that folks face when they're training and competing in an ultra endurance event. You identified, I think correctly so, that it is as much of an eating and drinking contest as it is physically training your body to be able to compete. So in your eyes, having experienced it yourself and worked with athletes, what are some of the common challenges that folks face?
I would say the biggest one is GI distress, because it's not if you're going to have some stomach issues during a long event, it's usually when you're going to have those stomach issues. So especially with running, because running is such a jarring sport, you're constantly going up and down, which is very hard on your stomach. Biking, rowing, sports like that are less jarring. You are still in a curved position, so that bothers you a little bit more. But that GI distress is a problem, and bonking is a problem because you're going along burning anywhere from 600 to in excess of 1,000 calories an hour, and we can't absorb that much. We can only absorb maybe 240 to 300 calories an hour. So you can see the problem. It's a deficit sport. So what do you do when you start bonking? How can you keep feeding yourself to have enough energy to keep going? And it's impossible. So what do? You have to slow down.
Let's talk.
That's the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's probably something that folks that are in the audience with us right now can most certainly relate to. It seems like anybody who's been competing in these types of events has faced one of those two issues, GI distress or bonking, at some time. Let's start a little bit with GI distress and talk about it a little bit more. What is the impact of consuming, a lot of the simple sugars that people often gravitate towards in terms of your gut? How does it impact your gut?
Well, you go for the simple sugars because eventually what your muscle needs is glucose, a simple sugar. The problem is you don't just put that glucose directly into your muscle cell. It'd be a piece of cake if we did that. But we eat it something, we consume something, it goes through our stomach. When it's in our stomach, it's actually causing us more problems than it is helping, because now you've got something that's in competition with your muscles running. Now you've got to send some energy to your stomach to digest whatever it is you put in there. And it's not yours yet. So until those calories get into your stomach, get out of your stomach, and get into your bloodstream, that's when the calories are now yours, usable calories. If they sit in your stomach, it doesn't help at all. As many endurance athletes know, if it sits in your stomach long enough and things aren't going very well, you're going to throw it up. Well, you didn't actually get those calories. So the biggest problem is getting something into your stomach, get it digested through your stomach out, where it can become some usable energy. And our stomach's kind of picky, particularly when it's running from a tiger or a lion or whatever our body thinks when we start exercising, fight or flight. So it's shutting down, our body's shutting down a lot of the things it doesn't need to do, like grow our nails, grow our hair, digest food. It's in competition with our muscles trying to get away from its perceived danger running. So what happens is if you get too much sugar, too high of a concentrate of sugar, your body can't digest that. If it's too low, you're not getting enough sugar, well, you can keep going, but probably at a lower level. So that's the problem, the actual mechanical problem of getting something out of your stomach and into your blood.
And it's fascinating, right? Because the two issues that you identified kind of seem related in some ways, because if you're unable to keep feeding to meet the energy demands with the simple sugars, then clearly that's going to result down the ultimately, later in the race or at some point in the race in bonking, because you're not getting the nutrition you need to support that energy maintenance. So in terms of bonking specifically, Sonny, what do you see? Like, I guess, why do athletes bonk? Besides not being able to simply keep up with the nutritional needs, is there any other reason why athletes bonk?
Well, no, not. It's just you're not getting as many calories into their muscles to go at the level of speed that they started out at. So take the traditional marathoner when they hit the wall. When they're hitting the wall, they're basically running out of carbohydrates. So most of us are carbohydrate trained. Almost all endurance athletes, you throw the carbs in, you use the carbs. It's a fast, quick energy system. The problem is we can't carry that much. We don't store that much, and we don't have that much. So now we have to take them in. Okay, so now we just start taking these carbs in, and to a certain level, if you're going low enough where you can just digest those carbs, fine, you go along. But as we start increasing our intensity, we have trouble digesting those carbs. So all of a sudden we start running out. Well, we're, an adaptable human beings, and if we've got a tiger chasing us and we run out of our carbs, our body finds another way of energizing us so we can keep going, and that is we start burning fats, and we also break down some of our own muscle to come up with some more carbohydrates. Well, if you break down the muscle, the very thing that's getting you through the race, obviously that's not a good thing. When we start using fats, it's a slower energy process. So it's cleaner, but it's slower. So the bonking individual can keep going, but at a lower level. So that kind of brings me into another segment. If you can train your fat burning system, now you actually have more onboard calories, so you do not have to replace as many calories. So now you're able to use some of your own body fat that you're already carrying to get you through a race. The problem is you can't just get up in the morning and decide that you're going to burn body fat today on your run instead of carbohydrates.
So, this idea, Sonny, off the top, you were talking about when I asked you the reason that you got into this. You had mentioned that you were fascinated by some of the newer techniques and the emerging science, and this is something, this ability to teach your body to better burn fat, to help alleviate some of these issues that we've been talking about, the GI distress and the bonking. This is something that's been being talked about now more and more, and being looked at more and more than I guess it was maybe a decade ago. What got you from conceptually? What got you thinking? I'm assuming that in sports nutrition you were somewhat classically trained. What got you to think of things a little bit differently?
Um, well, actually, some of the research was there, but we kind of got away from it. Some of the long, slow distance things were actually there. Phil Napletone years ago was one of the leading scientists on better butter burning, fat burning more and more. It just got changed. We got into this more intense, more calories. The harder you exercise, the more calories you're burning. Well, in a way, it's true. You are burning more calories, but that's not always the goal. So what I started looking at is this deficit of how many calories you're burning an hour and how many calories you can actually absorb an hour. Well, the math doesn't add up. You're going to bonk. So how can you figure out a way to mitigate that problem a little bit? And one of the ways is teaching your body to burn more fat, changing your fueling system. So when we start exercising slowly, we're burning mostly fat and just a little bit of carbs. As the intensity and duration ramps up, there's eventually a crossover point where we are now burning more carbohydrates and less fats. And for every individual, that crossover point is at a specific heart rate for that individual. So if you think of it as a chart, and you're slowly ramping up your heart rate and you're ramping up the amount of calories you're getting from carbohydrates or from fat, and then all of a sudden you're now getting more calories from carbohydrates. If you could push that heart rate from, say, your crossover point is 130 beats a minute, if you could push that to 150 beats a minute, think how great that would be. All of a sudden you could run longer and at a higher intensity and still be burning your own body fat. And even the leanest person, if you take a 150-pound male athlete that's 12% body fat, they have enough fat calories, like 70 to 80,000 fat calories on board, even though that's a very lean person. So being able to use those fat calories is great. You've already got them. You don't have to ingest them. But again, it takes some training to change your fueling system to go from being more of a carb burner to more of a fat burner. And the way you do that is by pairing your nutrition and your exercise. And that's an easy thing to say. Okay, so now what do I do? Well, to actually do this in a scientific process might take 6 to 10 weeks. Your exercise is about 30% of the effort, and your nutrition is 70%. So it's a huge nutritional issue. You can't just decide to start running at a lower heart rate and start burning more fat unless you take the carbohydrates away. If you don't take the carbohydrates away, then you just are using less calories. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense, Sonny, and I think I think this is significant, and I'd like to perhaps have you emphasize it again. But you just mentioned that training your body to burn fat, 30% is exercise, 70% is nutrition. I'm thinking that for a lot of people in the audience, that might have caught their attention because in the past, I would, and perhaps you know better, but it seemed as though teaching your body to burn fat, people were focusing more on the exercise component of it. Is the idea that you can manipulate your body's ability to utilize fuels through nutrition? Is that specific concept something new, or has it been out there and are people just awakening to it now?
The concept is not new because that's the way our bodies, again, our adaptable bodies happen. If we start to starve, if we don't get any food, we start using our fat. So, but this is a calculated way to use our fat at good exercise. If you're starving and you don't have any food, usually you would sit around and not do a lot of exercise. We're trying to adapt it for a performance level. So the fat-burning enzymes that we have in our body have been around forever. What we want to do is adapt them to specifically exercise. So in caveman days, we were more adaptable because we never knew when the tiger was going to show up. So we never knew whether we were going to get food. But now we can plan this. So to do something like training your fat-burning system, you'll take maybe 6 to 10 weeks. You need to know where your crossover point is. You can usually tell, because if you go out and you have a heart rate monitor on and you're running along and you're doing fine and you're doing fine, all of a sudden as your heart rate creeps up, you're not doing fine anymore, you start bonking, that could be your level. Phil Maffletone has a chart that's out there. Bob Seebohar has a book on it. You can be tested for your metabolic crossover point. But the point is somewhere along the line, you can exercise below that crossover point, meaning a slower run for a longer period of time if you take out all your grain carbohydrates. So if you take out all your sugared carbohydrates, the exact thing that most of us are eating during endurance events, you take that out, you adapt your body over these 6 to 10 to 12 weeks maybe, by taking those out. And what your body does is it starts to say, okay, if I'm not going to get any carbohydrates coming in every 30 minutes, every hour, as I've been used to, then I better come up with some more fat-burning enzymes so that I can use my own onboard fat. And that's what your body does. That's the adaptation. We build up more fat-burning enzymes. There's not a limit on that. There's a limit on a lot of things our body can do. No limit on that.
So that's fascinating, Sunny. And you started to kind of talk about what I was going to ask you next, which was, how do you really train your body to do it? And one of the things that you've been mentioning is, those grain carbohydrates or those sugar carbohydrates, really, I guess things that are more fast acting that enter your system quickly and cause these swings in your blood sugar levels. I want to take a step back for a minute and, for people in the audience that may not know, what is blood sugar and why, what impact does controlling our blood sugar have? Why should we care about our blood sugar in the context of distance running?
Well, not just distance running, but also health. As we eat sugar, it spikes our blood sugar. So we create a lot of insulin to come heading out to say, wait a minute, our body likes a homeostasis, a nice even line. We get too much blood sugar out there, and we send out a ton of insulin, and we end up sending out usually too much insulin, because the more sugary it is, the more insulin we're going to send out, and we end up crashing afterwards. When you get low blood sugar in your slide, the blue line, the blue area there, one of the main things that happens is we stop burning fat. So we don't burn any of our body fat when we go crashing down there. That's the worst thing that can happen to an endurance athlete. We don't want those spikes and crashes. Okay, that's for an endurance athlete. The second thing is just that sugar in our life all the time causes our body to be in an inflammatory state. And this is something I've really tried to come through lately in my talks and in my writing is, okay, so you take some ultra runner, ultra distance person, they don't have a weight problem. They're fine. They've been eating pasta every night for years. They've been taking in all the goos and the gels and whatever, and they do fine, and they perform fine, and they don't even really have too much gut problems. But they're constantly bathing their body and all their cells in a high sugar content. That's not good for our lifetime health. That's an inflammatory state, and that's where all of a sudden doing something really good, these ultra endurance events, exercising, doing something good for our body, we might have actually retracted a little bit, and maybe we're doing something bad for our body at the same time. So to use more of a fat-burning system and just to not spike our blood sugar so much is great. So there's some great ways when you're eating your dinner or your breakfast and you're not exercising, you can mitigate that blood sugar spike by adding some protein, some fat, or some fiber. Okay, fiber is great, no calories. All right, protein, a little bit better. Fat, good fats, great. The problem is when we're exercising, that fiber causes, back to that number one thing, GI distress. The protein and the fat slow everything down in our stomach, keep us from getting calories faster. So the very things that might help mitigate the sugar spike do not work during performance exercise.
One point, Sonny, that I think is so fascinating and important to highlight is, what you were talking about in terms of overall health. I mean, 99% of the people that are doing these sports, are not getting a paycheck based on where they finish. And most folks are doing this for better health, to maintain fitness, for longevity. So can you really just speak to that point? I mean, I know oftentimes people are focused on what's going to make me faster, but you work with a lot of athletes, and I think you kind of mentioned this already, but how much are you trying to open people's eyes to just the overall health impact of their nutrition?
A lot. The top 10% of a race, those athletes probably are not unhealthy in what they're doing. They're special. They've got some good genetics. But for most of us, middle of the pack, I'm a middle of the pack runner. I love doing what I do, but I'm still middle of the pack. And I could do every single science thing that I know to try and improve myself, and I'm not going to get to that top 10%. So I want to be healthy while I'm doing this. And I think that's one of the main things, and where I've changed my focus a lot. The sports nutrition foods are fine for their place. So some of the sugars, the maltodextrins, most of the products out there are not super starches. In fact, yours is really the only super starch that does not spike our blood sugar. So there's no other product out there besides UCAN that does that. So we can eat real food, and that works to a point, except when you're trying to go 50 to 100 miles, eventually that's too much fiber, too much fat, too much protein, which are the good things for the rest of the time. But that sugar spiking and that inflammatory state is something that we really want to look at. I think people start taking some of the products and they use them to train. But what happens if you really like ultra running and you start training year round? Okay, all of a sudden you think, okay, how many of those packets do I open? Here I have salads, I eat organic, non-GMO, close to the source, all this, all my meals. But then, would I eat 5 cookies after that meal? Well, maybe I am eating 5 cookies, but I'm eating them in a different form.
That's an interesting way to think about it. That's certainly, most people, I think, when they're training, and they're trying to eat, a healthy diet, like whatever that means. They probably would not eat 5 cookies, but then in their training, they might not hesitate to suck down 5 gels. So that is an interesting way to put it. One more thing I'd like to ask you, Sonny, before you teased UCAN a little bit, and I want to. We have a lot of questions, kind of specifically pertaining to UCAN, and I know you have a lot of feedback, with athletes that you've worked with on that exact subject. So I do want to move into that, and then we will bring our guest Ryan Kaiser, who finished 11th at Western States, on in about 10 minutes here. But Sonny, what about the impact on body composition? As we see any of these endurance sports becoming more and more mainstream, we now see people with all sorts of body types, all sorts of levels of fitness, a range of different goals entering the sport. And, we've seen it time and time again being at different races where folks will come up to us and express that they've had a little bit of struggle, both training for endurance and maintaining or losing weight at the same time. In many cases, they're training, a lot of miles and training very hard. What is the impact on all of this spiking in blood sugar in terms of improving your body composition, and how does that utilization of fat for fuel going to help you reach that goal?
That's a good question. I think what happens is, as we train faster and faster, we eat these carbohydrates and then we use those carbohydrates, and we eat the carbohydrates and we use those carbohydrates. And it works fine if you're a lean, fit person and your weight is perfect. Okay, throw the carbohydrates in, use them up. Throw them in, use them up. The problem is if you throw them into a body that's carrying 10 or 20 pounds extra fat, you're not touching that fat. You're just making a circle with those carbs, carbs in, carbs out, carbs in, carbs out, and you're not touching your body's fat, your body's own fat. Training that fat burning system is very successful. So now all of a sudden you start going, okay, now I can start using some of what I'm already carrying on board. The problem, well, not the problem, but the issue is going through that training system, because most of us only have so many fat-burning enzymes. And again, fat is a slower to be utilized fuel. In other words, if you need something right now, eat glucose, eat a sugar, eat a carb. If you have a little bit of timing, a little bit of time to get more fat out there, great. If you're running slower, for instance, now you have a little bit more time. If you want to speed that up, you have to increase the number of fat-burning enzymes. So you have 10, you get so much energy. You have 100, you get 10 times that amount of energy in the same time frame that you used to only get 10. So if that makes sense, we're getting, as we build up more fat-burning enzymes, we're able to use more, which means we are now attacking the body fat that we have. We are becoming a leaner person. So we're losing body fat because now we're using more of it for energy. When we exercise, we never use all carbs or all fat. You're definitely going to use, both systems. But as we increase that fat-burning system now, and we don't have to take in so many carbs, now the deficit is coming from our body fat, not from lack of calories.
That's a great way to explain it, Sunny. I think that makes a whole lot of sense. And so, and I'm happy you clarified something there at the end, because as we're talking about this utilization of fat, we don't want to get it twisted that you're not suggesting that people are solely utilizing fat, or we're not talking about a ketogenic diet here. We're really talking about the right type of carbohydrate that'll control your blood sugar and allow you to simultaneously use fat and carbohydrate. And that's something that you just, said that I think is an important point to reemphasize. So let's move a little bit into the UCAN portion of the discussion. And just briefly, for folks that don't know what UCAN is, I'll just take about 2 minutes to kind of share what makes UCAN unique and what it actually is. So why don't I take a few steps back from this graph and really talk about the origins of UCAN. So what's unique about UCAN is our carbohydrate that's in the product. Sunny, you heard her allude to it. We call it superstarch. And the whole backstory to superstarch is that it was originally developed for our founder's son, Jonah, who has a rare blood sugar disease called glycogen storage disease. So in a nutshell, these kids, in order to maintain their blood sugar, had to be fed every 90 minutes to 2 hours. This was 10 to 12 times a day, 3 to 4 times in the middle of the night. They lacked an enzyme that allowed them to break down carbohydrates and convert them into blood sugar to give them energy. So Jonah's family, they in 2000 they started funding research looking at all different types of carbohydrates, and their sole goal was to find something they could feed their child prior to sleeping at night that broke down slowly and maintained that steady and even blood sugar, so they didn't have to wake him up in the middle of the night several times to feed him. So for 8 years, the top carbohydrate researchers, they were looking at every carbohydrate source out there, you name it. They were looking at different types of grains, barley, tapioca, a host of different things, maltodextrin, waxy maize, things that were already out there. And their sole purpose was to find something they could give to these children prior to sleeping at night that managed their blood sugar for an extended period of time. Eventually, they found superstarch. So what is superstarch? It's the starting ingredient is non-GMO corn. It goes through a 40-hour cooking process, just heat and water, no chemicals, no enzymes. So this is a completely natural carbohydrate, non-GMO corn cooked with heat and water. And the way it's cooked significantly slows the breakdown of the carbohydrate. So instead of something like maltodextrin or simple sugars that's going to enter the system quickly, the superstarch is entering the system slowly and steadily over time, and it's maintaining blood sugar. Now remember, Sunny mentioned this before, but when your blood sugar is steady, your energy is steady. So oftentimes, we've thought of needing X number of calories per hour when it's not really the calories we need. It's that blood sugar maintenance that we need. So that's oftentimes sometimes what's misconstrued. So with super starch, Jonah is now taking the equivalent of 3 packets of UCAN, or roughly about 90 grams of this prior to sleeping at night, and it keeps his blood sugar steady for 8 hours. So he's able to load with it prior to sleeping and stay steady and sleep throughout the night. This is a huge, huge deal for his family. But around 2008, some of the founders of the company started wondering what would happen if we used this on trained athletes or regular individuals. Because, like Sonny was talking about, from a health perspective, we always want to control our blood sugar. And from an athletic performance standpoint, it can be beneficial as well in terms of allowing your body to utilize more fat and not having to take in as many calories throughout a long distance event. So we really wanted to test our carb against maltodextrin. Maltodextrin is what you find in the majority of your popular sports nutrition products, from GU to Hammer to Clift, Power Bar, you name it. Most of them are going to use maltodextrin as their carbohydrate. So if we look at the graph on the screen, what we find that's very fascinating is with the maltodextrin, 25-gram serving, you're going to get that big glucose spike, and then about 30 to 40 minutes later, you're going to get that big blood sugar drop. And think about it. They tell you to take a gel every 30 to 40 minutes or so. Why? They're not making it up, right? The science supports it. When your blood sugar starts to drop, you need to raise it back up to maintain your energy. What's fascinating with super starch is that same number of calories or the same grams of carbohydrate in this graph. A, there's no big blood sugar spike. And B, the decline is slow and steady over time. So you never feel that crash. And what's really significant to look at is on the x-axis, if you look at 2.5 hours, 3 hours, your blood sugar is still right around baseline. So this means that you're able to maintain your energy for a long period of time on fewer calories because UCAN is controlling your blood sugar. And like Sonny talked about, when you're controlling your blood sugar, you're allowing your body to tap into and utilize more fat. You're not causing a rise in insulin, and you're not kind of getting your body to say, I have to deal with that sugar first. You're really keeping everything steady and allowing your body to utilize more fat. So Sonny, I'm flipping it back to you here. How did UCAN come on your radar? When did you hear about UCAN, and what intrigued you about the science or the properties of UCAN?
I think someone from your company might have sent me an email, but definitely I saw a couple of science studies that showed what the superstarch actually did, and one of the biggest things that I narrowed in on was leaves your stomach quickly. And I thought, boy, that's something that could really help an endurance athlete, because again, that food in the stomach and the GI distress is a problem. But then as I got into the science more and more, and as I started working with some athletes using UCAN and started using it myself, I really discovered a lot more than just that. One of the things is UCAN is a super starch in that it gets out of your stomach fast. There's a lot of energy in it, but it drips into your system slowly. So it is like an IV. And when I first started giving clinical presentations, I would always, show a runner with an IV in his arm and said, this is the best way, this is the perfect way to exercise and to run a 100-mile race. Have an IV. That's what you use, and that's what you can absorb. But all of a sudden, I look at this and I think, wow, instead of having to do something every 30 minutes, as I was telling my athletes to do, now you could do something where it would last a lot longer than that, maybe 1 or 2 hours, maybe longer. And I think when runners are starting to use the UCAN, they don't want to save it for a race. They want to use it. They want to start practicing with it. And it's pretty amazing. That means when you start going into this fat burning system, you may not need anything for a couple hours, maybe some water and electrolytes. The other thing I really liked about UCAN is, I think when the product very first came out, you recommended a scoop to so much water, something like that. It's like all products say put 1 scoop in 16-ounce bottle or whatever. And then we started discovering that you could mix it with any amount of water. It didn't have to be mixed exactly per amount because you are not making a percent sugar solution. So most maltodextrin products, we used to have 6 to 8% sugar solution. If it was more than that, you got GI distress. Less than that, you didn't get as many calories. But a lot of people got GI distress. So they started bringing that down to maybe 4 to 6% sugar solution, which works pretty well with a lot of products out there, especially if you're doing an event that's, 4 to 6 hours. But if you're doing something longer, this UCAN works very well because you can mix it with what you need. So if it's a really hot day, you mix it with more water. If you don't like water sloshing in your stomach, like I'm a small person, I use very little water. I'm not somebody who dehydrates very easily. So I can mix it with a small amount. I think that's one huge advantage. Another advantage, of course, is, no sugar spikes. So you're going along evenly. And again, if you have a big sugar drop, you stop burning fat. So if you stop burning your own body fat in an ultra endurance event, you're in trouble then. You're going to have to slow down. So it doesn't mean you might not finish, but you're going to have to slow way down or force yourself into eating more carbs during that time. So the powder that I found, one, it mixes really well. Two, you can use it in varying amounts. And three, you can add electrolytes to it or not add electrolytes. Your new UCAN Hydrate is great. It has no calories in it. So you can add some more electrolytes to the already electrolyted fuel or less. Or if you aren't needing anything, for instance, when I go out, I don't take anything for a couple hours unless it's a really hot day. Then I'd use the Hydrate. Then after 2 or 3 hours, then I'd start using the UCAN fuel. Then I'd start maybe adding electrolytes depending on the event. And then we can talk about going on further than that. What happens after 16 hours? What happens after 18 hours? Should I go on to that?
Why not? Give a stab at that.
Yeah, okay. So people say, all right, so what do you do about real food? What do you do about the gels and things? Do I never take another gel? No, that's not true. As you're running 100 miles and it's a race event, now you're going to be going faster. So you're going to be going above your fat burning level, although it may have changed your level. So one of the big things that happens is you need less calories because now you're using your onboard fat, but you still may need some. So towards when you start feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm really bonking, or I'm going up this hill and I'm starting to feel like I need more calories, you can take a gel. You can add those things in towards the end of the race. It doesn't hurt the UCAN. You may need to wait a while to take the UCAN because you took something else. I also find I've worked with some long-distance swimmers. Paul Lundgren attempting to swim 82 miles across the Sea of Cortez, which he's made it a long ways, not totally. Elaine Howley set world record on Lake Pend Oreille last summer, 34 miles. They both used UCAN totally, and when they wanted something a little different, what we found is we used egg whites and avocado. So when they wanted something that actually satiated their stomach a little bit more, we added the avocado and we added egg whites. If you're swimming in ocean water, that goes great because it's salty. So it's not that sweetness. So there's, you can mix things like that. You can add in some real food later on. That's because your brain is getting overloaded with the same thing. Your brain wants something else, not necessarily that your body needs something else.
And Sunny, that's a great. I'm happy you took it to that further level because we've gotten some variety of this same question from many folks where they're asking, can UCAN maintain the energy needs for 8, 10, 12, 14 hours? And what I'm hearing you saying, especially with the examples of Paul and Elaine, is the things you're feeding them, egg whites and avocados, we're talking about fat and protein. So we're feeding for satiety and like you mentioned, perhaps for variety too, because the brain craves that variety sometimes later in the race. But simply from an energy standpoint, once you nail kind of the dosage and the timing of UCAN, UCAN as your primary carbohydrate source can absolutely sustain your energy, for the events 12 to 24 hours. It's just more just figuring out the timing and then also kind of understanding you individually, how much variety you're going to ultimately crave during that time. Am I right in saying that?
Yes, and again, when we're running a 24-hour race, we're missing 3 meals. So yes, your body is saying, okay, just send me the fuel for the muscles. But at the same time, your liver, which is running the rest of your body, which is running, the energy it takes to have the blood flow, the energy it takes to contract muscles, to keep your brain functioning, which we all need after about 14, 15 hours. So, we need something to go to the liver too. That's where protein and fat are going to go before they're broken down into usable energy for your muscles. So we can use some of those, but it has to go to the liver first. So now we're getting some of that satiating satiety factor at the same time. So yes, you should be able to get on a treadmill and just have X amount of superstarch going into your bloodstream, and you should be able to go on for 3 days. But we have a brain, and it doesn't quite work like that. We want a little bit more. So adding some of the food, adding some of that in is fine. So one of the questions I get asked is, okay, the superstarch is great because it gets out of your stomach really fast. What happens when you add food to it? What happens when you add gels and bars and sports drinks to that? Does it slow that down in your stomach? That's why people need to practice with this, because theoretically, yes, it would slow it down a little. So that means, okay, if you're taking UCAN all the time and you're taking something else now, is that going to slow it down in your stomach? Probably. So you don't want to go through aid station 9, 10, and 11 eating real food and some gels all of those times. You want to eat one, wait a little while, then eat something else, wait a little while, eat something else. So maybe doing UCAN, okay, a gel, UCAN, possibly putting in the UCAN protein. I find this works really well with runners because, again, it's liquid, so you're not it's not even a gel or a chew, but you are getting some of that protein, which will help curb the hunger.
Really, really good stuff, Sonny. We're going to bring in Ryan Kaiser here for a moment, and then Sonny will come back on for the last 10 minutes or so to answer some of the questions we've been getting. But I want to introduce Ryan Kaiser at this point. Ryan finished 11th at Western States this year. He's an ultra runner, and he is kind enough to take some time to join us this afternoon. Ryan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for coming on. Really appreciate you sharing some of your experience. So let's talk about just briefly about you as an ultra runner, Ryan. What appealed to you about the sport? How did you get into this whole world?
Well, I started out doing more road running, and I did that kind of as a form of exercise, a form of competition. That was when I was living back down in Texas. And when my wife and I moved up to Oregon, I started having more access to trails. And with trails, you see a lot more of the ultra type races. So last year, in 14, I kind of committed to trying to focus on doing some of the trail runs, some of the ultra distance, and figuring that stuff out.
Very good, Ryan. And nutritionally, Sonny started us out by talking about some of the challenges that ultra distance athletes face with nutrition. What were some challenges that you have faced or currently face or did face when you first started moving up in distance?
Just about every one that she described, because for a lot of folks, myself included, it's just kind of an unknown on what to do, on how frequently to fuel, what to take in, what's going to sit well with your stomach, and, whether you're one of those individuals blessed with an iron gut or whether you're going to be someone that has a real weak stomach that just can't keep things down, whether you cramp, and then how to balance out the hydration and all of those things. So I would say the first time that I really went out and tried to do a 50K distance, I learned real quickly that pacing and nutrition were things that needed to be dialed in when you start getting out on the trails. And, I learned the hard way because I didn't really take on a lot of calories when I was doing road races. I mean, I would do a marathon and maybe take, 3 gels with me during the course of a marathon and go through it. And then, you get out and you're running for 4 to 5 hours. That's just not going to cut it for 2 reasons. One, you're not typically in the same flow that you're in on a marathon in those courses. A road marathon is going to be pretty easy on your system, relatively speaking. You get on the trails, you're going to have changes in terrain, you're going to probably have more climbing, more descending, and it just seemed like I was using more energy to cover a comparable distance. So, I had to start figuring a way to get more calories in, and I started out doing gels or jelly beans or whatever was at the aid station table, and that just wasn't cutting it. It seemed like it didn't matter how fit I thought I was getting. If the nutrition wasn't there, I couldn't use that fitness. So I started looking around for alternatives.
Sounds good, Ryan. And the alternative did bring you towards UCAN. How did you find out about the product? What intrigued you about UCAN in terms of alleviating some of the issues you had faced?
I had never really heard of it. My wife was running with a group in Portland, and some of her buddies were using the product, and so she ordered that starter pack that you guys were doing when with Meb, when right around the time when he won the Boston Marathon, and so she picked that up and ordered it, and it came in, and it kind of sat in our pantry for a little while, and she encouraged me to take a look at it. So I got online, and I didn't do a webinar like this, but I just started researching a ton about it before I started using it, and learned a lot about kind of what you needed to do or what was helpful to do in connection with the product to really maximize the benefits of it. And so after doing that research, I committed to changing up my diet a bit. And I'm not saying it was necessarily a paleo diet, but I definitely cut out a lot of the processed carbohydrates. I switched over to doing a little more protein. If I was going to eat carbohydrates, it was more things like sweet potatoes. Probably ate more than my fair of sweet potatoes last year. A lot of vegetables and proteins. And then using UCAN in the morning before my runs, I would do a smoothie. And that would really keep me stable for most of the day until the lunch hour, even with the exercise. And once I started using that and really committing to it, it took, I would say it probably took a month to a month and a half for my system to kind of readjust. Those first few weeks, cutting out carbs and doing UCAN and eating, a higher fat, high protein diet was kind of, I felt a little sluggish, to be honest with you. But once the body kind of adjusted, I would say it's probably 3 to 4 weeks if I'm really thinking back on it, I found myself being able to go out on the longer runs like Sonny was just describing and not taking hardly anything with me except water, maybe a couple of salt tablets just for electrolytes, and being able to sustain longer efforts just based on what, the fat stores I had in my body, and then keeping the UCAN in the system is kind of like the foundation fuel.
It's a good way to put it, Ryan. Having that UCAN as that foundation fuel, and that's what we talk about a lot. Now let's go to Western states this year, because I think this is again a question that people have had some variety of: is how exactly do you implement this stuff in a race? So, love to hear what your nutrition plan was this year at Western States.
Sure. So I've for a while just been, doing the smoothies have been a staple before any longer effort. I personally like the chocolate powder with the protein. Some people use the protein afterwards for recovery and just use the UCAN fuel, for during the efforts, during their racing efforts. But I like it in the morning. I like the flavor of it. So I would do a smoothie, and I did a smoothie before Western States, and I did a pretty robust smoothie with a lot of calories because I wanted close to 900 calories in there. And one thing to keep in mind, and it took me a little while to accept it, UCAN isn't really, in my opinion, a hydration product. You do mix it with a fluid, but it really is more of, it's your calories. And so I would do 2.5 scoops with, since it was Western States, it was going to be hot, I chose to go with a coconut water instead of a coconut milk. But I did coconut water with that. I did 2 big scoops of nut butter, some dates cut up, a little bit of Udo's oil in there, just to get some more calories, a little more fat. And then I personally put some honey in it, just kind of like the flavor of honey, and just get a little extra calories there. That tends to burn off. So I blend that up and drink that about an hour and a half before the race. And then when the race started, I pretty much stuck to water and some fruit off the tables when I was going along. And then I refilled with the plain UCAN at about mile 45 to 50, and took that on. And that kept me really stable there up until late in the race, and then kind of later in the race, I was sticking just to. I did have one more UCAN, half a bottle of UCAN over at the river, which was at 70. But then, just my body works at about 75 to 80. I don't need or want a whole lot more calories if I've stayed on top of it, and I'm ready to just kind of buckle down and try to push through to the end. So I would take, a little bit of broth at the tables, soup or maybe a little more fruit, but I wasn't taking any more UCAN at that point. And I was popping an occasional gel just for some little bursts of energy. I think that's one thing to keep in mind is I do use gel with UCAN. I think it helps in races. I don't when I train, but when I'm racing, I do take it simply because it kind of, for me, sometimes you just need those little boosts during a race, and it the UCAN keeps you stable, but then the gel can give you some of those spikes when you hit those lulls. I would describe it this way. I used to kind of get these big swings and ups and downs. With UCAN, I don't. I still have some ups and downs. They're just more mellow. And then with the gels on top of that, it gives me some boosts when I need that to kind of get that really quick absorbing sugar, if that makes sense.
Similar to what Sonny was saying, in terms of utilizing some of those more fast-acting stuff, carbs later in the race. Now, Ryan, one thing that also wanted to pick your brain on is, UCAN in training. So I think Sonny also alluded to this, but your training is really where you're able to teach your body to become more efficient at utilizing fat, and minimizing those sugar spikes in training can really do that. So how do you use UCAN during your training?
So I typically, so if I'm going out for something, let's just say like a 10-mile run in the morning, I won't typically take it beforehand. I might just have, a scoop of nut butter or something just to get a little something on the stomach, but nothing that's high in sugar. And then, if it's a 10-mile effort or, an hour and a half effort, I'll come home and then I'll do a smoothie. I'll do the chocolate smoothie afterwards. And that'll stick with me then and kind of keep my body sustained afterwards up until about the lunch hour. And then I'll do, try to do a low-carb lunch with a protein and a vegetable and something that has a higher fat content to it. Anything longer, if I'm doing a longer run, and typically that's on the weekend, I always preload with UCAN. And then depending on how the run goes and depending on the intensity of that run, I'm a big fan of the fast finish long runs. So I might not take any gels for the first 2.5, 3 hours. And then at the end, when I'm picking up intensity, I might pop a gel at the end. But I'll load with it. And then again, when I come home, I'll take it just to kind of keep me stable afterwards. Because I think it's really good. I don't know if I subscribe to the thing that you have to eat, 45 minutes after a run, but I typically will do that smoothie right afterwards, and I feel very stable. So I think that helps.
And one of the good points you raised, Ryan, was the UCAN with protein that we see on the screen. So the UCAN Fuel and the UCAN with protein both contain similar amounts of the superstarch. And again, just to remember, the superstarch is what is the unique ingredient in UCAN that's going to break down slowly and keep your blood sugar steady. So you're still getting that steady energy from the UCAN with protein. And to Ryan's point, some folks will, and Sonny mentioned this too, folks will take in the UCAN with protein during longer efforts, especially sometimes in lieu of solid food. If you're looking for something that's going to aid with satiety, that's generally going to be protein and fat more than carbohydrate. And so having that slow release carb from the UCAN and then having the added protein to help curb hunger, that can be something that's really effective for people doing long distance efforts when they're trying to not take in as much solid food. Was that kind of the thought process behind what you're doing, Ryan? Or for some people, it's just like, hey, I like the flavor of the UCAN with protein more. Where do you come in on that?
For me, it was a flavor issue with doing the protein one before. I just really like the chocolate flavor. And the protein, I can't tell difference before. I've used regular and I've used the one with the protein before, and I can't tell a difference in the way it affects me. So it was really flavor driven. Now I can say during races when I use it, I absolutely go with the plain. I just don't like a sweet flavor at all, even if it's, like the orange or a lemon. I mean, the flavors are fine, and if it was before race, that's fine on my palate, but during a race, I just kind of want it a plain flavor. And I want to stress, I guess, that, for people that want to give this a try and they want to use it in a race, that, don't expect to take it and just feel this immediate, boost of energy. It's something that is going to get in your system that you need to work on using. and you have to stay on top of it. So take it before you need it type of deal. Whereas, a gel, a lot of people take a gel when they feel that they're starting to get into a lull, or they're starting to maybe not even bonk, but just have a low moment, and they'll pop the gel, and then they'll get that spike. And that's okay to use those, but with the UCAN, if you can get a kind of a strategy that works for you. So for me, it's about every 2 to 2.5 hours I call it dosing it. If I redose it about those time periods, I don't really hit too low of a point, and I know that my body will absorb and process it in that time frame. But you're not going to feel that immediate boost that you feel with a gel or any other type of simple sugar that you're taking on.
And that's such an important point because we always encourage folks to try training with this, because there is some testing that you have to go through in terms of understanding how to space out your doses. Like Ryan so accurately pointed out, if you with the gel, you take it when you feel low, and kind of within a few minutes, it's going to raise your blood sugar back up pretty quickly. But with UCAN, it's a slower breakdown. So you don't want to take UCAN, that mid-run dose of UCAN at that panic point where you're like, I need something immediately. You want to be about 20 minutes ahead of it to give it time to break down and start releasing into your system. So it's a great point that Ryan just mentioned, and definitely why we encourage folks, especially for longer stuff, to practice the mid-run dosing and training and kind of figure out exactly how much you need to take and how to space those intervals apart. But generally speaking, at an ultra running type of pace, we find folks doing a serving of UCAN roughly every 90 minutes to 2 hours, and kind of depending on how efficient your body is. For some folks, that does extend to 2.5 plus hours. So that's where you need to figure it out individually. Ryan, really good stuff. Stick with us for a minute here. I just want to bring Sunny back on and just take about 5 minutes of questions. If you guys don't mind spending a few more minutes with us. But Sunny, I'll give this one to you. Again, something that people have asked a different variety of, but a lot of questions on pre-race or pre-training breakfast. What works well with UCAN? What should people be thinking of in terms of their pre-race breakfast if they also plan to use UCAN 30 to 45 minutes prior to going out for their run?
Okay, good question. And one of the things that I want to compliment Ryan on is, so when he did some of these long runs, just maybe his weekend training runs or whatever, he started out with a scoop of nut butter just to put something in his stomach. Well, that's perfect because he didn't spike his blood sugar. So back to that one graph that you had where you really spike your blood sugar and then it really drops way off. The last thing you want to do for your pre-run breakfast is do something that spikes your blood sugar, now drops your blood sugar, and now you've stopped burning fat, and then you head out for the race. If you do that, you're going to use all your carbohydrates up first, and then you're going to bonk. So I can't tell you how many times I've seen the start of the marathon where everyone's standing around sipping their sugared sport drink, and not exercising yet. So, 30 minutes before the race starts, they're spiking their blood sugar. Right about the time the race starts, their blood sugar is now dropped, and they're using all carbohydrates. So they go out feeling great. But then slightly, not very far into the race, they're going, uh-oh, what happened? What happened? So that breakfast or pre-race breakfast should definitely be something that does not spike your blood sugar. For me, I use the UCAN protein. So for Ryan, it sounds like he adds some things to that. What I would do is do something like a smoothie, because anytime you're drinking something, it's going to take less process than eating something, so a liquid form. So you could start out with something like that, add one thing at a time, try it, see if it works. If that works, great, add another thing. So make it flavorful for you. So definitely, I probably would not get up and drink UCAN plain for my go-to run before breakfast, because I want some flavor then. After that, fine, you can plain, but you can add some of the different things, or definitely do something that is non-spiking. That's why egg whites are good. Egg yolks, yeah, that's fine to put the egg yolks in there too. It's just a few more calories and a little bit harder to digest than just a plain egg yolk.
Great stuff, Sonny. And I'll just add to that, just from our experience, what we've heard other folks tell us, absolutely, scrambled eggs or egg whites with some avocado. So again, we're talking about protein and fats. We're not spiking our blood sugar. I've had folks tell me that they might do one piece of wheat toast with some almond butter on it. So again, when we're pairing the carbohydrate with protein, it is helping blunt that blood sugar spike. So I guess there's a lot of different things you can do if you kind of have that knowledge in mind that I don't want to have a lot of fast-acting carbohydrates. So it's something that's kind of a traditional runner breakfast that I think we'd say stay away from would be like, don't have a bagel with honey and a banana, right? That's fast-acting carb,
Right.
fast-acting carb, fast-acting.
Right.
So I think you've given a lot of good examples, and hopefully that's that helps people.
And that piece of toast with nut butter on it, not jelly. That's a big difference. There's nothing wrong with a piece of toast before your breakfast there. It's just if you just had the toast, you'd spike. So now you want to think, okay, bring some fat and protein onto it to mitigate the spike.
Excellent. One more for you, Sunny. Chip asks, how does eating low glycemic foods before and during running compare to UCAN?
It's similar. So eating low glycemic foods is just like UCAN. You're not spiking your blood sugar. The only problem with the low glycemic foods is usually they're low glycemic because they have more fiber. So that's the problem between, sports nutrition products and real food. The more you can handle fiber, the more you could just eat real food. Obviously, cavemen ran away from tigers and they didn't have UCAN, clip energy or goo energy or any of this. So, you can do it on anything. You just have to train yourself to do it.
And one thing I would add is that when the super starch was looked at, remember we were looking at all different types of low glycemic carbohydrates to see what maintained blood sugar the longest, and we did find that super starch was the most effective. So we haven't done the glucose response of super starch versus every other low glycemic food, but generally speaking, anecdotally too, you might find that super starch and UCAN is going to maintain blood sugar longer than something that's low glycemic. So something that's low glycemic certainly won't spike you, but it's questionable if it'll maintain you as long. And then certainly the point that Sunny raised about the GI distress is a great point. Ryan, this one's for you. Ann wanted to know what is in your post-run smoothie. I know you talked about your pre-run smoothie with UCAN. Is there any go-to that you have for the post-run smoothie?
For my post-run, I try to just keep it pretty simple. I will use milk, typically a whole milk, just to, it's a nice kind of calorie-heavy base. And then I'll put in 2 scoops of the chocolate. And I almost always put in a nut butter. It just depends what kind. Sometimes I'm a big fan of the Justin's brand, but I'll do that chocolate hazelnut sometimes. Justin's brand is low in sugar, that's why I picked that one out. But a chocolate hazelnut or sometimes just a regular almond butter. I typically just want something that's going to be kind of hearty to sit on my stomach afterwards. It's going to stick with me. Because, at that point I've gone most of the day on smoothies, so I need extra stuff in there just for the calories, if nothing else.
Good stuff. Thanks, Ryan. Sunny, I'll give this one to you. Ken mentions, and I should mention this as well, that the UROC, the Ultra Race of Champions 100K, is this weekend in Northern California, in Auburn, California is where it starts from, and UCAN is actually going to be the nutrition on the course for that race, which we're really excited about. First time we've done that for an ultra. And so Ken's question is, what's the best way for fat adapted and non-fat adapted athletes to use UCAN? And I guess I'll start that question kind of by asking you, can UCAN still work if you're not fat adapted?
Yes. The short answer is yes. You don't have to be fat adapted for UCAN to work at all. It's not going to hurt at all. It's just that you probably won't get it as soon. So just keep ahead of it. So what you want to do is keep ahead, because what your body has probably had a lot of carbohydrates, had a lot of sugars in it. So again, it's going to slow things down from getting out of your stomach. But no, there's no problem with that at all. And before we go any further, I just want to go back to one thing that Ryan said, because he made such a good point that I didn't cover. And that was, he didn't feel that he needed to adapt to that 30 to 45 minute post-exercise window of eating or of replenishing his calories. And that's partly because he did not deplete his carbohydrates. So when you're on this fat-burning system, that 30-minute window that I have hammered into my athletes for years becomes a little more unnecessary. You need the calories to go on for your daily living, but you didn't deplete your carb sources. You depleted fat, and you don't have to replenish the fat unless you're very, very thin.
It's a good point, Sonny. Very good point. I'm glad you clarified that. And I think just to piggyback slightly off what you said, to answer Ken's question, Ken, what we've also seen is like similar to what Sonny was saying, but folks that are more efficient at utilizing fat for fuel might be able to go longer between their doses of UCAN. So Ryan was also kind of talking a little bit about this adjustment period and alluded to sometimes, being able to take UCAN and then going 2.5 hours without needing to take in another carbohydrate source. So for those people that are newer to it, I would simply say just take it more frequently. So like I always tell this to people when they're first getting started with the product, if they're trying to use it for distance, maybe at first start with, a scoop or 2 scoops every 60 to 90 minutes. And then as you use it more and more and your body gets adjusted to it and you're not as reliant on the simple sugars and the every 30 to 45 like Sonny was talking about, soon you may say, hey, like this is going to last me 2 to 2.5 hours. So is it a great business model for us? Maybe not. The more you use it, the better it gets for you. But I think from an athlete standpoint, right? So, but I think from an athlete, it works really, really well. Let's see. I think we'll just ask about 1 or 2 more before we get you guys out of here. And Sonny and Ryan, really, you guys have brought such a wealth of knowledge to this. So it's clear from all the questions that we're getting that people are absolutely fascinated by what you're having to say. So I appreciate you sticking with us for a couple more minutes. So the portability aspect of UCAN, I'm going to pose this to both of you. Sonny, I'll start with you, then move to Ryan. Brian says, my issue is the portability and how to bring it with you for those multi-hour methods. Even the gel method makes a lot to tote around if you adhere to the dosing suggestions. So, Sonny, what have you found? Either the ultra swimmers might be a slightly different situation because I believe that you're traveling kind of next to them, so they're not carrying it with them. What have you found for ultra runners in terms of the portability of UCAN?
You mean actually taking the powder in a pouch or something like that?
In terms of the logistics of carrying it. Has it been a challenge for some of the ultra runners?
Well, now, one great thing is no, because you don't have to carry nearly so much of it. So I think you can add it to things. I think the easiest thing is there in your center picture with one of those little pouches there that you can just pour into your water bottle. The runners that you rock are going to be very lucky because it's already going to be there. But you can definitely carry it. You can definitely put it in a pouch. Some of my runners have made a very thick paste out of it, and they put it in a little squeezable handheld carrying thing, and they'll just squeeze some of that and drink some water with it. They actually like the paste to be in their mouth. Maybe they're using it a little bit more like a chew, so they're actually leaving some flavor in their mouth, or they like to eat it between their teeth. Everybody's different, and I might add, when you first start using UCAN, it's a different flavor. It's just slightly different. The flavors are all great. The plain, it's different, and I want people to think of it as fueling, not eating. You're not going to sit down and eat 3 scoops of UCAN for breakfast in a powder form. Don't think of it like that. We're thinking fueling. So really, the easiest method for your body to accept is the way we want to think of fuel, not a hot fudge sundae with a cherry on top. We don't want that.
And I think one of the other points, Sonny, that you mentioned way early on was the ability to concentrate. And I mean, you did just highlight it again. But in terms of a portability issue, the nice thing about UCAN is, because Ryan mentioned this too, talking about dosing with it and not thinking of it as hydration, but thinking of it as a food. You can concentrate multiple servings. If you have a 28-ounce water bottle or something that you're running with, you can concentrate 4, 5, 6 scoops in there. So you're able to carry several hours of nutrition in just one bottle. You don't have to dilute it to aid digestion.
Exactly.
So that's a way where you can have, you just have your hydration completely separate. And whether you're drinking water at aid stations or you have a Camelback with just, water and electrolytes, and then you just have one bottle concentrated with several hours of fuel. Brian, that's what I would suggest to you on that end in terms of portability. Ryan, what did you do? I guess you weren't, I don't know, it doesn't seem like you were carrying tons and tons and tons of it at Western States, but how did you deal with taking UCAN on the go?
Well, that race is great because there are a lot of aid stations and checkpoints for your crew. So I take it in a handheld water bottle, and I pick it up, and I was carrying one with just water and then one with the plain UCAN in it when I picked it up at, I think it was like mile 50 or so. But here's the deal with it is, I would say this: I would not try to put it into a bladder for a hydration pack, just because it is kind of it is kind of more of a chalky product. And I think that, like, for me, what I like to do is I like to use it with have it dosed pretty heavy or concentrated pretty good in one bottle, and take that. And then if I need a little chaser of water with it, that's fine, because I'm just viewing it as fuel, like Sonny said. And the plain doesn't have a flavor to it, so it's going to be more of a starchy. You'll taste it. It's not gritty, but it's just, for those of you that haven't tried it before, but it is going to have more of a chalky kind of consistency. So I would take that, and I think your point is great in that you can concentrate it quite a bit in that bottle. So if you wanted to carry that bottle for quite some time, which is, isn't that big of a deal, or if you have a pack that takes a bottle, in a sleeve, like on the front or side or whatever, or on your hips, you could put it in that way, and you could drink half the bottle and have, if you had 6 or 7 scoops in there, you'd be doing just fine. So I would say definitely use some sort of bottle when you're doing it. The idea there that you showed with the slide and putting it in a baggie and making a paste, I've never tried that, and I think I'll probably give that a go and see how that works. It's kind of interesting. But yeah, so that's for me. I would just use the handheld, and then if you're wanting something to kind of chase it down with, if you feel like you need that, then just have water in your bladder. And plus, I'm just not a big fan of putting anything in those bladders apart from water, just because they get kind of gunked up with sugar or whatever it could be that you're putting in there. So I just typically reserve that for water.
And great point, Ryan, because again, it's something you said before, but to reiterate, UCAN, we're not the UCAN Hydrate that you see on the screen, but the other UCAN products are in the fuel category, not the hydration. So it's not really something that that you're putting in a bladder and sipping on consistently. We've said this a few different times, but you're really treating it as a food and kind of dosing with it. And just one point that I'll mention that we didn't talk a whole lot about, but UCAN, we do now have bars, the UCAN snack bars, which also have the super starch in it. So they're going to fit into the same kind of slow burning carbohydrate idea that we've been talking about. So the UCAN bars as well, that's a great option to keep, in your pockets or in your pack or whatever it may be to carry those in terms of a solid option. Sonny, before we sign off, I'll give you the last word. Anything you would like to close on? Anything you'd like to say prior to signing
One
off?
thing I'd like to say is those bars are delicious. I love your bars. And this is something else that just aside from ultra running, a lot of times we're out doing errands or whatever, and we think, oh my gosh, I didn't eat. I need to eat something. Having something like that UCAN bar is great because it's not spiking your blood sugar. It's not taking something like a sports bar that we normally might have, that's easy. You can carry it because you don't want to get low blood sugar because you haven't eaten for a long time. It's a great snack that way. And again, a lot of times in your actual race, it's nice to have something to chew on. So some people like it, they want to eat something hard. If your stomach's going into a distressed state, you might not want it. But actually, I think the bars have a place in the long distance events too.
Fantastic, Sonny. Well, Sonny, Ryan, I learned a lot. I hope the folks in the crowd did too. Really, really wonderful to have both of you guys on with us today. Really, really valuable insight from both of you. You guys have lived it as well, so you could speak certainly to the theory, the science, and also the practical application of everything we're talking about. So again, really thank you both for your time. You guys will be getting a follow-up email with all of the entire webinar recording, so you guys can access this on your own. You'll also be getting a special discount code to try UCAN if you haven't had a chance to use it before, or if you just want to stock up as well. And we'll also be sending out a link to both Sonny and Ryan's websites as well in the follow-up email. So if you guys are interested in what they have to say, if you want to get in touch with them, that'll give you the opportunity to do so. For Sonny Blende and Sonny Blende, should say that correctly, and Ryan Kaiser, I'm Varun Sriram. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today. Have a great rest of the afternoon.